Product-led transformation has been all the rage recently. We keep hearing these words, product-led transformation. I'm Radhika Dutt, author of Radical Product Thinking, and I want to share with you some radical ideas around why product-led transformation goes wrong and what we can do instead. Let's look at the background in terms of where did this product-led transformation even originate? Until now, most companies have been either engineering-led or they've been sales-led. When we're talking about an engineering-led company, what often happens is we build solutions in search of a problem. We build the next shiny object that we hope will be successful. And on the other hand, in a sales-led organization, we say, oh, let's just build it. Whatever is going to sell. If the customer is asking for something, we'll just build whatever brings in revenues. And what has happened is that companies have realized that both of these extremes make it very hard to scale. There are different problems, but yet the commonality is that because it's hard to scale, they've realized that we need balance between these two. And product-led came about as a balance between engineering-led and sales-led. And around the idea of product-led transformation, we keep hearing all of these different words, like we have to be user-centric, we have to transform to be customer-driven, we have to apply design thinking. All these words get thrown around, but the reality is the path to being product-led still remains just as foggy. My experience has been that we have to start with clarity around what is this transformation even about. And actually using the words product-led only causes more problems because that sounds like it's a power struggle in the organization. And especially in an organization which has traditionally been either engineering-led or sales-led, when you now come in and say we want to be product-led, this is going to feel like a coup. So instead of calling it product-led, what we should call it is vision-driven, because that's really what you're trying to achieve. This isn't a power struggle. You're trying to get your company to be more vision-driven instead of being engineering-led or sales-led. So let's talk about what vision-driven actually means, because what has happened is that until now, instead of learning a process to be vision-driven, what we've constantly learned and internalized in how to build products well is that we must focus on iterating quickly. We've learned that we have to iterate quickly, fail fast, learn fast, build, test, learn, scale. And if we do these things just right, then our products stand to be successful and make lots of money. Well, unfortunately, processes like being lean or agile, they're the equivalent of having a fast car. Being able to iterate quickly, that helps us get to where we want to go faster. And it's great to have these processes done well, to have a fast car, to have a McLaren, for example. That's wonderful. But that's not enough. But you might also hear, you have customer feedback. Why can't you just put together customer feedback to tell you where you need to drive? So you put customer feedback and your fast car together and you're all set. The analogy I like to give is that customer feedback is like asking for directions to check if you're heading in the right direction, right? It's like being in your fast car and stopping to ask for directions. And when you step back for a moment, what you realize is before you get into your fast car or ask for directions, you are in the driver's seat and you have to know where you want to go and roughly how you're going to get there. Because what happens is speed by itself looks like this. We could all be moving fast, but in different directions. And so speed looks like chaos very often. And the way this manifests itself is through product diseases. What I find is product diseases are just so common. My background has been that I've worked in large companies, my own startups, as well as small ones. Let me try that again. I've worked in large companies and small, all the way from startups to multinationals. And I've also worked in a range of industries, all the way from broadcast and advertising to government and research firms, right? And I found that these same diseases happen everywhere. So let's do a checkup and tell me if you've seen these. Let's start with, a common disease in a sales-led organization. If you've ever worked in a sales-led organization, you'll recognize this: obsessive sales disorder. Right? Your salesperson comes to you and says, if you just add this one custom feature, we can win this mega client. And that sounds mostly harmless. And so we say yes. And pretty soon, by the end of the year, you're sitting with a stack of contracts and your entire roadmap is driven by what you have to make good on. So if it sounds familiar, feel free to share that in chat. There is solidarity in talking about product diseases. In an engineering-led company, very often the most common disease I see is this one, narcissist complex, where we're so focused on looking inwards and focusing on what we think the customer needs that we become disconnected from what the customer actually needs. So the worst example of narcissist complex was when I was listening to an executive working in a group of hospitals who was saying, we need patients to come back often for us to be successful. I'll let you meditate on that for a moment. And if you're in a sales-led or an engineering-led company, you might also see some of these other diseases that are common across both. And by the way, sometimes you see comorbidities where many of these diseases occur together. Maybe you've seen pivotitis, where we keep switching from one thing to the next. You could even be pivoting from one sprint to the next. Or you might see strategic swelling, where our product starts out well, but then we keep adding more and more and more features to it so that our product does everything for everyone, and it'll even make coffee if you just ask nicely, right? So if you've seen these diseases, share those in chat, because recognizing diseases is the first step to actually overcoming them. Because these diseases happen when our iterations are driven without clarity in a vision and strategy. Meaning, these diseases happen when we're not being vision driven. What we need is, instead of speed, which is just everyone moving in different directions, we need to add direction to our speed so that all those arrows, they're all pointing in the same direction, and what we have is velocity instead of speed. So this is where radical product thinking comes in. It helps give you that direction to your speed. Radical product thinking is a methodology for building world-changing products, and it gives you a step-by-step approach for building these products. In the radical product thinking way, you can engineer the change you want to see through these 5 elements, starting with this clarity of vision of what's the change you want to bring about, then translating it into a strategy, meaning a set of actionable steps, then into a set of priorities and how you'll translate your vision and strategy into everyday action, then execution and measurement. And finally, you can use these elements to engineer culture. And you'll see that in the radical product thinking way, all of these are designed as communication elements so that you can bring everyone with you on the journey. Now, I want to give you an example of how these elements of radical product thinking really come together to build successful products. And the example that I want to share with you to illustrate this is the contrast between DC versus Marvel. Now, if you look at DC was a sales-led organization. The way they went about building their product was by chasing yearly summer blockbusters, always thinking about that next short-term step, right? So how did this start? In 1989, it started with putting out Batman, and that went really well. So what did they do next? They did Batman Returns, and that went well. So what did they do next? They came up with Batman Forever. And really, they stuck with this forever theme because after that, they launched Batman and Robin. And if you've seen that movie, oh my God, that was one of the worst superhero movies of all time, right? And so really after that, DC needed a change. They needed to do something differently. So what did they do? You would hope that they would do something different. But no. They put out Batman Begins again, and this time with Christian Bale. But at least this movie was better, right? Then they put out The Dark Knight, followed by The Dark Knight Rises. And both of these were good movies. But really, after this, they had exhausted this theme. So what did they say? They said, ooh, what if we try Batman plus Superman this time, right? And so this time it was Batman versus Superman. And this movie was so bad that in one scene, one character spares the other because their moms share the same first name. Yeah, so, well, maybe they would do something differently after this movie? Nope. They released The Batman in March 2022. So you get the picture, right? This is DC being iteration driven. Iteration led means you keep doing a little bit more, just small increments of the same theme that has worked. So let's look at the contrast with Marvel. What did Marvel do? In the late 80s, Marvel was really struggling. And in the 90s, Marvel had sold off every major character they had. They had sold off Spider-Man, X-Men, all these smaller characters, even like Thor and Hulk, they were on the verge of bankruptcy. They needed to rethink their product. So what happened? Kevin Feige rose through the ranks at Marvel, and he had a vision for Marvel. And he rose through the ranks because he had studied Marvel comic books. And his vision was to create movies that were true to Marvel Comics. And it turns out comics are really a profound commentary on, societal and human issues. And so, to write the radical product thinking vision format for Marvel's vision, here's how Kevin Feige's vision would pan out, right? So this is Kevin Feige's vision written out in this radical product thinking format. So it would go like this. Today when movies who like superheroes want to be entertained and they want to see themselves reflected in the heroes that they see on screen and identify with them, they have to watch superhero movies where they may or may not identify with these characters, or they have to turn to comics instead. This is unacceptable because we miss out on impacting viewers more deeply, and we miss out on bringing awareness of social and human issues like comics do. We envision a world where moviegoers can see themselves in a universe of interconnected superhero characters that reflect societal and human issues. We're bringing about this world through our movies and characters that are true to our comics. So this was this clear vision that Kevin Feige had. But a vision is only the first step. What you really need next is an actionable strategy. And this is where the radical product thinking approach comes in for creating a radical strategy. So RDCL, radical, is a mnemonic for creating a comprehensive strategy. The R stands for real pain points. It means asking, what's the pain that makes someone come to your product? In the case of Marvel, moviegoers who would come to these movies, they don't know this universe of comics, comic characters. They're not these comic buffs, but they want to feel like insiders, and they want to get to know these characters and feel like they have the inside scoop. So the design, or the D, is the solution to these pain points. So in the case of Marvel, they had to create character development around these little-known characters. They had to create a series of interconnected movies. Think about the end credit scenes, which often get talked about even more than the movie itself, right? Then to deliver on this design, they needed some capabilities or an underlying engine for delivering the design, right? So if you think about the underlying engine, they needed to buy back some of these characters that they had sold off, like Thor and Hulk. They also needed to communicate a clear roadmap, phases 1 through 6. These were phases they talked about long before these movies came out. And then finally, they had to think about logistics, meaning how will we deliver the solution to the customer? They had to think about their business model, how they were going to market this. In terms of the business model, right? They had 500 million to be able to make 10 movies. So they had 500 million to make 10 movies. And so they had to get the right actors. Think about, actors like Robert Downing Jr. They had to pick actors who weren't too famous at the time, but who had talent to make their business model work. Think about, all these teaser trailers that they created where they only show that to fans who attend these expos like the D23 Expo. All of this was marketing to be able to help their whole strategy come together. Once they had their strategy, they had to translate that into a set of priorities and a cross-functional roadmap, which is a phased approach to be able to plan this over time. In the radical product thinking way, when you think about priorities, you balance the long-term versus the short-term. In this case, the long-term vision was movies that are true to comic books, and the short-term was survival. It was about financial survival. So things that are good for both, right, vision and survival, are of course ideal. But sometimes you need to also invest in the vision, meaning you need to do things that are good for the vision, but maybe not good for the short term. And sometimes the opposite of that is taking on vision debt, which is it's good for financial survival, but not for the long-term vision. So how did Marvel balance these quadrants? They started by investing in the vision. They needed to first test if a movie is going to be successful without A-list characters, because remember, they had sold off these characters that were important, like Spider-Man and X-Men. So they started by testing this vision and investing in the vision. Next, they took out a loan, right, to be able to make those 10 movies. It wasn't good for the long-term vision, but hey, it was important for survival. And then they built things in the ideal quadrant. They created an interconnected set of stories. And they also had to invest in the vision by buying back characters that had been sold off. So, and finally, by the way, they also casted the right characters. That was also in the ideal quadrant. And then, they built these things and they also announced a roadmap. This is where we think about how our strategy is going to be delivered over time. And this was their roadmap for delivering that strategy. And finally, the next step was hypothesis-driven execution and measurement. I mentioned that they first had to test this hypothesis. How did they test this hypothesis that they could make good movies without A-list characters? Well, they tested that in 1998 with a movie called Blade. This was an unknown superhero character, a vampire character, and they tested this with a budget of 45 million, and the movie made, over 130 million worldwide and created a cult following, right? And so that proved out the hypothesis that they could make movies that were successful just based on the power of their storytelling as opposed to, how well-known the superhero character was. And that set about the rest of their strategy that allowed them to create these interconnected movies. In being vision-driven, Marvel has produced 10 out of the 30 highest grossing movies of all time, and Kevin Feige has become the highest grossing movie producer of all time. Okay, how did DC do instead? Right, they have produced 1 out of the top 30 highest grossing movies of all time. Anyone want to take a guess as to which movie that was? I'll let you put that in chat. This is your little trivia quiz. Right. I'll give you 10 more seconds to think about what that movie was. And it's going to be a hard guess. Okay, let's see if you got this right. That movie was Aquaman. I will tell you that, when I put together this presentation, I was talking to my son, and my reaction was, oh, Aquaman, seriously? And my son was like, Mom, just look at him. So there you go. Okay, so the point is, we need to build radical products, right? Radical products are your mechanism to engineer the change that you want to bring about. And you do that by systematically translating your vision into action. And instead of being sales led or engineering led, we need to be vision driven to be able to systematically translate vision into action. In larger organizations, if you're trying to apply these ideas, there's one disease that you have to get over to be able to apply these ideas and become more vision driven, or in other words, to become product led or to go through this product led transformation, you have to get over locked in syndrome. Locked in syndrome is the disease that happens in large organizations, especially where, people feel committed to what has worked in the past. It's hard to get buy-in for adapting to market changes. When product is a new function in the organization, it feels like, we just transformed to become agile. Why are we now changing how we work again? Like, why do we have to do this product-led transformation, right? And so to really bring about this product-led transformation, we have to use this last element of radical product thinking, which is being able to engineer the culture that we want to bring about. And so I want to give you an example of how do we do this at a large organization. So this was an organization that worked with large theme parks and venues for their ticketing solution. And we used radical product thinking to be able to transform to become a more product-led organization, because product was a new function in the organization, and the organization felt like they were customer-driven by always giving customers whatever they were asking for. So they had the product disease that you now know is called obsessive sales disorder. So how did we engineer change? Well, first of all, we had to start with clear vision. We had to start with a vision for why are we even transforming? Why is the status quo unacceptable? Because we could just stay the way we are and continue to build products the way we are, continue to have our obsessive sales disorder. We had to talk about the problem with obsessive sales disorder and how that was making it really hard for us to deliver on our product roadmap. So once we had this clarity of vision, we could then have a clearer strategy. We had to train stakeholders to be able to understand expectations of product management, how delivering, all these custom feature requests was really making it hard to deliver on a clear roadmap in a predictable way. We had to then translate vision and strategy into this prioritization and a roadmap that was really clear to the customer so that we could start to be less reactive to customers and more proactive. And then finally, we had to measure our product, not just by customer satisfaction and saying, well, are our customers are they happy because we're delivering custom feature requests? Or like, how else do we measure whether our product is doing well? We had to work with customers to define, what does success mean for our product? And we translated our strategy into clear metrics for success that we could measure. Instead of just measuring popular metrics, we translated the right metrics that were right for the company from the strategy. And the most important part was we had to communicate all of this across the organization to bring people with us on the journey for product-led transformation. And so this idea that transformation too requires us to be vision-driven, so that when we're transforming, it's not everyone moving in different directions, but rather we give everyone this clear direction so that we can all move together to transform to being more vision-driven. Okay, this last thing that I want to share with you is, until now, the example I gave you was of Kevin Feige and what we can do as leaders to be able to transform an organization. But what if you're not in a leadership role? How can every single one of us be vision-driven? For that, I want us to first unlearn the myth around who is a visionary and what makes someone a visionary. Because today, a lot of our ideas around being a visionary are centered around toxic masculinity. So I want to share with you a very different example so that you can see that you can apply radical product thinking anywhere where you want to create change. And the example that I want to use to be able to share that with you is the example of Claudette Colvin. Now, history has forgotten about Claudette Colvin, but Claudette Colvin was one of the first few people. In fact, she was arrested for defying bus segregation laws and not giving up her seat on the bus when she was asked to, about 9 months before Rosa Parks. She was only 15 at the time. And when I interviewed Claudette Colvin for my book, Radical Product Thinking, I asked her this question. You weren't even an adult at the time. How did you refuse to give up your seat when you knew the dangers of doing that? And what Claudette talked about was her vision. She said, I wanted a world where we all had the same American dream. And she wanted to be able to live in this world where everyone could share the same American dream. And she was tired of living in this world where adults just complained about how badly they were treated and not doing anything about it. And so she didn't give up her seat because of that. When I talked to her about, kind of how her vision translated into her action, it was very clear that she had invested in the vision when she didn't give up her seat. But interestingly, Claudette Colvin said that when she did that, when she refused to give up her seat, that was an impromptu decision. She just decided on the spur of the moment that she was going to refuse. What truly showed how much she invested in her vision was when she became one of the key plaintiffs. There were only 4. And there was immense pressure to not participate in being a plaintiff in this Broder versus Gale case. This was the Supreme Court case that overturned segregation in buses and was a landmark case for the civil rights movement. She invested in the vision by being that plaintiff and helping overturn that Supreme Court, helping overturn that law. Her vision was really shown in her decisions, and this is how we can engineer change. To me, one of the biggest achievements after writing Radical Product Thinking was to see Claudette Colvin holding this book, and this was back in 2021. Well, the main message I want you to take away from this presentation is you can engineer change anywhere, wherever you want to see this change, right? And you can do this through this clarity of having this vision, translating it into a strategy, a set of priorities, a clear approach to execution and measurement, and translating all of that into culture. And the reality is you can do this no matter where you are in the corporate ladder. You can engineer change and communicate this, and that's what helps you level up as a leader. And so if you'd like to learn more, you can read the Radical Product Thinking book. It's in bookstores, including at Amazon. You can reach out to me to ask me about workshops and training. You can also get the free Radical Product Thinking Toolkit. It's on radicalproduct.com. And lastly, you can message me on LinkedIn if there are questions that we don't get to today. And I always love to hear from people in how they're creating vision-driven change. So please feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. I always love to hear your stories and how you're creating change. And finally, I would love to get to your questions. So I invite you to share your questions in chat and in the live session.